Dear All Saints parishioners, once again it's a great joy for me to stay connected to you through this weekly reflection. Last week was a break as I had to talk about the limited reopening and not exactly the weekly reflection. And before I begin my weekly reflection for this week, I just want to thank all of you for your cooperation, for your understanding. We are back to our regular schedule this week, and the sign up for the limited reopening of the Masses is online. So go to our website, www.allsaintsportland.org, and on the opening page, scroll down and you will see how to sign up. It will take you to the Sign Up Genius, and then you can sign up for the Masses. And once again, I would like to thank all of you who participated last week in the Mass, and all those who have signed up this week. I appreciate your understanding. And today I want to talk about and reflect with you on the responsorial psalm for this week. Let all the earth cry out to God with joy. So we are encouraged by the psalmist, by the psalm that we will be praying this Sunday, that we are to cry out to God with joy. I took this particular psalm today, our responsorial psalm, precisely for this one reason. Today, more than ever, we have a lot to tell God. Probably not so much good things. I'm sure all of you are with me on this. We have a lot to tell God. We have a lot to shout out to God. We have a lot to cry out to Him and say, God, we are so much frustrated. We are disappointed. We struggle. Life is so much challenging. We have our own emotional, psychological, financial challenges, probably frustrations sometimes. We have a lot more to tell God. But the question today is, and the invitation today from the psalm is, do it, but not with a sense of sadness, not with a sense of complaining, but with joy. So I want to raise this question. Is it possible, humanly possible, when you are in this situation? Can you really cry out to God, speak to God, shout out to Him with joy? Is it possible to do it? Is there a way to do it? That's how I really approach the readings today. And especially I want to draw your attention to the first reading in the Gospel today. In the first reading this Sunday, you will hear about Saint Philip, who is in Antioch. And then he is preaching and proclaiming the Christ to the people of Antioch. And if you go to the Acts of the Apostles, it's quite interesting. I always tell you, pay attention to the context. So what is the preceding scene of this passage that we read in the Acts of the Apostles? What happens before it? What happens before what we read in the first reading of today, namely Saint Philip proclaiming the Christ to the people of Antioch, as we all know, is the cruel and violent death of Saint Stephen, the martyrdom of Saint Stephen. We know from the Acts of the Apostles that Saint Stephen was stoned to death, and there arose broke out a great persecution for the believers. And therefore, we know from the Acts of the Apostles, immediately after the martyrdom of Saint Stephen, those who were followers of Jesus Christ were scattered all over the place, in Judea, in Samaria. Philip is one of them. Someone who is running away from the persecution, scattered. But what happens? He is able to actually proclaim the Christ. And we read in the Acts of the Apostles, and I want you to pay attention to this one particular phrase in the first reading of today, that the whole city rejoiced. And therefore, in the context of persecution and what happens after the persecution, namely people running for their life, trying to find a place, and then going to different places, leaving their loved ones, their families, scattered all over, but not giving up and doing what they are called to do, proclaiming the Christ and bringing joy to the whole people. Philip was not complaining about the persecution. He was not filled with sadness, but rather he was trying to bring joy to other people. And that's what the psalmist says today. Let all the earth cry out to God with joy. And therefore, to the question, is it humanly possible to shout out to God, to speak to God, to cry out to God with joy? It's possible. People have done it. People like St. Philip, people like many of the apostles, and many people today do that. Yes, it's a difficult time. It's a challenging time. But are there not people who are going day in and day out, every day, with a determination to bring food to their table, to take care of their families? How many people are going into the world and bringing joy and hope to other people, even though they are risking their own life? Is it not facing an unsafe situation with joy and hope? Is it not responding to the invitation of the psalm today? Cry out to God with joy. Don't ever lose this sense of joy, hope. And in the gospel today, Jesus actually gives two reasons why we should never lose this sense of joy. You can complain to God, you can ask God, you can really place all of your frustrations to God, but not with sadness, not with a sense of complaining, but with joy we can do it. The reason, Jesus says, first, I will not leave you orphans. I will come back to you. We know the context of the gospel passage. He is speaking to the troubled disciples, apostles. He knows that his time is very near. He would be leaving. And in fact, in the gospel today, Jesus talks about, in a short while you will not see me. So he clearly tells them that I will no longer be with you. I will be gone. But he says, I'm not leaving you orphans. I am always with you. In another way. The second reason that Jesus in the gospel today talks about is the Holy Spirit. He speaks of the Holy Spirit. And what is this Holy Spirit that we often read in the Bible? There are many explanations. Ruah, the breath of God. The life principle. But also from the Bible we know the Holy Spirit is the indwelling presence of God in our life. God living in us, indwelling presence of God, is called the Holy Spirit. Therefore, God's permanent, eternal presence with us, not just in the sense of being present in the life of an individual, but he is also present in the community that believes in him. The eternal presence, the permanent presence of God in the believing community. And if we have this truth really deep in us, allow this truth to soak into us, that the eternal, permanent presence of God is always with us in our community, as a believing community, then I think, dear brothers and sisters, instead of complaining, instead of becoming sad about what we go through, about what we experience, we can actually cry out to God and shout out to Him with joy. That doesn't mean that we don't need to express our frustrations. We can do it. We can ask questions to God. Why do you let all these things happen to us? Why are so many innocent people, our loved ones, are taken away from us? You can vent out your anger. You can actually ask God the question, but we can do it with joy, with hope. God has given us that ability to do it. And that's what the scriptures are all about. And therefore, dear brothers and sisters, I encourage all of you during this week, as you would participate in the Mass, as you would hear the readings today, start from the responsorial psalm, which really invites us today, cry out to God with joy. And ask yourself, can I do that today? It's not something impossible. Philip did it. Many of the followers of Jesus did it. And Jesus gives us the reason why we should be able to do it. 2 reasons. God will never abandon us, will never leave us orphans. And His presence is indwelling presence, eternal presence, permanent presence, not just in individuals, but in all those who believe in Him, in the community. And therefore, as a community, we can always seek support from one another. And we can always have this very loving, but a courageous relationship with God, asking Him questions, expressing our frustrations and even anger, but always with joy and hope. I pray that this week will really help you to experience this love of God, the love of God that will allow us to shout out at Him with joy. God bless you.